Kia ora, welcome to Media Insider. I'm Shane Curry, the New Zealand Herald editor at large. Well, it's been another huge week in the New Zealand news media industry, and we have new insights today into the two seismic shifts for our two biggest digital publishers. Shortly, we'll sit down with Steven Joyce, the incoming NZME chair, following a rather eventful, I must say, annual shareholders meeting this week. But first, we turn to NZME's great rival Stuff. They and TradeMe have announced that they're coupling up again, with TradeMe buying 50% of Stuff Digital.
I am so excited about it. 5 years ago, I almost found myself unexpectedly the owner of the business. As I say, it was a moment in time of that whole weird COVID lockdown sort of time we were all in that sort of gave rise to that opportunity. And it all happened within 2 weeks then. So I didn't have a lot of time to think then about what would be ahead. But in the 5 years since then, it's just been the absolute, greatest pleasure to be able to sort of lead that business, try and set it up for a new future and eventually get to the point where we have this successful marriage, partnership, whatever we want to call it, with another really great Kiwi company.
That was Stuff Chief Executive Sinead Boucher. Now, while the deal marks a huge payday for her, of course she bought the company for just $1 5 years ago, the price is being kept confidential. However, it is likely to be in the millions of dollars. So will staff at Stuff actually benefit? Stuff announced in 2021 the establishment of a trust that would receive 10% of any benefits if the company was sold or listed. That trust was set up for the benefit of Stuff staff. I put the question directly to Boucher as to whether they would benefit.
The idea behind that is that I've gifted 10% of the value of the company to staff that will be handled through the Staff Trust. So if and when we make any distributions out of things like this deal, the staff will definitely benefit from that.
I pushed Boucher further on this and when the journos might see proceeds from the sale.
We've still got a couple of months at least to go before the deal is completed and a few sort of other things to do like that, but it will definitely be a watch this space and we will keep them informed.
Watch this space indeed. So why are Stuff and TradeMe actually teaming up? It all comes down to property. TradeMe property is under intense pressure from NZME's OneRoof property platform. And we've seen with the link up between the Herald and OneRoof just how much traffic can be driven to these property platforms. TradeMe obviously sees a huge advantage in teaming up with Stuff's big monthly audience in order to get more audience for its own property site. Stuff and TradeMe's announcement on Tuesday came just 4 hours before NZME's annual shareholders meeting and was designed to cause maximum impact on the rival firm. At the annual shareholders meeting, agitator shareholder Jim Grennan was appointed a director of NZME and former National Party MP Steven Joyce was appointed the chair. For this week's feature interview, I sat down with Joyce and I explored with him the future direction of OneRoof and the vexed question of editorial independence. But I started with an area very dear to his heart, radio. Well, Steven, thanks for joining me today on the second Media Insider podcast. We've set the studio up.
Yes, I see
For
that.
the incoming chair of NZME, so it's lovely to have you here.
Thank you.
I wanted to start firstly the symmetry of you returning to the media industry is a good place to start, I think.
Yeah, sure.
I was catching up on the book last night and some of
Right.
the early days of Energy FM and the sense I got of the sheer amount of fun you had in those days.
Yes, we did.
Some of the anecdotes that you remember from those days?
We basically all started a radio station because we wanted to play REM on the radio, and so reasonably simple aspirations. And yeah, in those days, the only radio station in town, distinguished itself by playing Dolly Parton and Kenny Rogers, running buy, sell and exchange 9 to noon, and then doing the racing in the afternoon. And they had a breakfast character. Roger Tonkin was the breakfast guy, and they had a breakfast character called Yudi the Yeti, which made an interesting strangled sort of noise that Roger made when he was talking to it. So you put that against the option of FM radio playing pop and rock music 24/7. It's probably no surprise we went to number one quite quickly.
Very quickly. I mean, I was looking at your audience share. It was up in the mid-30s, I think, or even higher.
Yeah. Wouldn't we all give something for that these days?
I mean, not even the Hoss gets it quite to that extent.
I'll remind them of that. But yeah, 38 share on our first survey, which was about 6 months. Now, to be fair, we'd warmed it up a bit with all those short-term broadcasts. And that was, of course, very strange days where you had to go in front of a broadcasting tribunal to get even a summer warrant, and initially they would warm the market up by allowing people to run stations for 7 weeks or so around Christmas. But you weren't allowed to run advertising before Christmas because you might upset the incumbent player. So we had to, like, if we were going to run before Christmas, we had to go non-commercial for a couple of weeks, and then after Christmas we were allowed to play ads. Those were the times.
Those are the sort of Muldoon days. Or
they were, yeah. And of course, Muldoon, memorably gave permission to the first 2 FM stations under duress. He really didn't want to do it, and they were in Auckland, and of course we followed along behind, and we got our warrant. We had to stand in front of a tribunal. Again, you had to prove that you weren't going to affect the established operator. So the Radio New Zealand people, as it was then, had to put their hand on the Bible and swear that we were going to decimate their audience, and we had to put our hand on the Bible and swear that we were not even going to touch them, and that was how the process went.
Yeah, and I was reading, some of the anecdotes and some of the war stories from those days. I'm not sure you get away with some of them these days. A crank call to Paul Holmes from JJ Feeney. Apparently there's a file here at NZME of the number of complaints and the...
Yes, well, that one was a special one, of course, because there was a time when Paul's love life was in the media a lot, and so JJ and Bob Reed, the late Bob Reed, they decided that they were going to prank Paul, or give it a crack anyway. And JJ was going to pretend to be his latest partner, ringing to talk to Paul. And she, got on to Paul while he was off air, between ad breaks and things. And she was saying that the paparazzi were around at the house and everything like this. And it just worked so brilliantly. And there was Paul trying to comfort her and tell her it was all okay and not to worry. and of course, I knew nothing about this except that I just arrived at work and got to my office and had the radio on, had the edge on, and was listening to this and thinking, okay, this is getting progressively more worrying as time goes on, and I don't know how they're going to get out of this, because normally with a crank call, the whole idea, and this was Kevin Black who actually started all of that, Blackie, was that you do a reveal at some point where you tell the person that they've been pranked, and everybody has a good laugh and we all go home. And JJ was so worried about how well it was working that she couldn't come to the reveal. So she just said, okay, bye, and hung up. and so where we were with a prank call and no reveal, and then Bob said, there was a sort of big silence because it was all done live. And Bob said, look, nobody tell Paul Holmes that was us.
Well, of course, he found out, and I think there is a file here at NZME from the back in those days, TRN and earlier.
Oh, it was a fantastic letter I got. It was blistering. It was, the lawyers had spared no effort to threaten JJ and Bob with prison if criminal convictions because of the way they'd behaved. And it wasn't actually until, I'm trying to remember, I think it was Brian Edwards, who some days later, because it was a huge furore, and some days later Brian Edwards wrote, I think he might have written it in the Herald actually, said, Paul needs to pull his head and this is how he made his career. And he was a mate of Paul's, I think. Yeah. So at that point it sort of all fixed up. But that was, one of many skates.
One of many, yeah. And I guess that bug, that kind of radio bug that I've observed since being at NZME, since we've integrated, there is a thing about radio people, that passion never really leaves, right?
No, and I've always, right the way through my time in politics, if you ever wanted to put me off my diary for the day, if I was visiting somewhere, stick me in a studio, being interviewed by the breakfast team, and I'd forget to leave, and they'd be pushing me out the door, and I'd be hanging on to my headphones, because it's just such a wonderful medium.
Yeah, so I mean that leads to the obvious question about, there's been a lot of discussion and talk about obviously the editorial direction of the Herald and so forth, but the radio performance of NZME, I mean, what do you make of it?
Oh, some wonderful talent, obviously, starting from Hosking and Heather and all the rest of the team at ZB, and then on the music stations. On the music stations, quite a few of the people have worked for me back in the day over the years, so it's quite fun seeing them again. And look, I think they're doing well, but like everything, we all want to do better. It might be hard for ZB to grow its numbers a bit, but perhaps some of the music can continue to grow. And it's all about entertainment. And this is an entertainment medium. And I think you've got to have some fun and you've got to be entertaining, and there's got to be a little bit of showbiz. And I think through all this change of media, that's been probably challenged a bit, largely because I think, and we're speaking much more widely now than radio, traditional media has got itself in a little bit of a defensive crouch over the years, which is understandable because it has been sort of attacked from all sides. And I think we're getting through that in the sense that we know what the landscape looks like now, where for many years we didn't know what the landscape was going to look like. Now, it's not to say there won't be more change, but I think what we're seeing is a huge number of people consuming a lot of media, like 5 hours a day, that sort of numbers. But it's all moved, and the question is, how do you thrive in this new environment? And I think NZME is at the forefront of that.
Yeah, I mean, that sense of fun that you talk about, I've always looked at the NZME radio entertainment numbers up against MediaWorks, which had the genesis with you.
Yeah. It's like,
and they haven't quite got the cut through that, say, a ZB has had. What do you put that down to? I mean, there's amazing talent on the entertainment radio stations.
Yeah, I'd be keen to have a bit of a look. I mean, if probably as chair, and you've got to be careful not to be too involved, but if there's a part of the business I know better than most, it's the radio part. So I'll be intrigued to have a good look and understand that a little better. And I'll be honest, I haven't, the last rating numbers were out last week. I had a bit of a look, but I'd love to have a closer look and see what's going on, because to sort of rehearse some of my old radio muscles and see what they're like.
Well, I was going to ask more crank calls to opposition radio stations.
That time might have passed.
That might have passed.
Yeah.
No, and I mean that obviously leads into the broader NZME conversation, and you've been quizzed quite extensively in the last 24 hours and the past few weeks about editorial independence. What does editorial independence mean to you?
Well, I don't think anybody in any facet of life has true independence, for a starter, because we're all responsible for what we do and say, and that applies in journalism as well. I think it is important that journalists have the right to select their story and to chase their story and in the context of the editorial policy, because the judgments have got to be made every day, and I think everybody recognises that, including Jim Grennan. And the last thing you need is a board looking over your shoulder saying, "Oh, I wouldn't do that," or "I wouldn't do this." But at the same time, the board has a role in terms of working with management on wider editorial policy, and of course the investment in editorial as well, because that's an important part of the story. So I think there's been a lot being made of editorial independence as such, but I think journalists in the family, I've worked with journalists for 30 years, everybody wants to be completely independent and have nobody outside showing any interest at all, but that's, life's not quite like that. But I don't think there should be anything to fear. If anything, it'll be more of a situation of having the debates and encouraging the debates and building on the craft.
Yeah, and obviously there's been a lot of focus on the editorial endeavour of the Herald especially in this board discussion. Are you as exercised about it as Jim Grennan?
I don't know whether as exercised about it, and it'll be interesting to see as Jim gets to know it, how exercised he is as well. I think one of the firstly, I would say that the editorial investment by NZME is substantial. And that's important for the country, and it's important for the company. So you just want to be sure that you're actually doing the best you can with that in terms of everything, productivity, the whole 9 yards. And it's going to continue to change. Yeah,
and of course the advantage we have these days compared with 10 or 15 years ago is the data that's readily available. So we know what works. I guess the balance with that is not being married to the data strictly 100% all the time. You've got to use your instincts from time to time around your journalistic.
Yeah, you have to do that. There's no doubt about that. But also it's probably more exciting in the sense that, to be honest, it was like that with radio ratings all the time. You think you're doing a brilliant job and the ratings tell you something different. And so it's not something you should follow slavishly every day, but it is something that you should be respondent to and cognizant of over time. So if you're drifting away from where your listeners, or as we were in radio, or where the people that are reading your stuff is, well then obviously you sort of got to pull yourself back and go, well, hang on, what's going on here? But the other thing to think about, I think, is, and we know there's stuff that appeals very, very broadly. So the royal family, or as an example, or there's stuff that has quite a narrow appeal, but is also very, very deep in its interest, and they can be very loyal readers. And I think it's a marrying of that. So you've got, for the Herald, you've got the wide reach of everybody, and then you've got your subscribers, but you've also got, people interested in business news, people are interested in politics, and they're not the whole story. And so one of the things I'm really interested in is this whole question of mass customization, if you like, or serving up to people what they are really interested in. And I know you're doing some of that, and there's probably an opportunity to do more of that, because I think that people are less tolerant of seeing things in their feed, which is not that they're not interested in. So how do we keep improving that?
You're talking about the AI personalisation of the homepage.
But also perhaps they can choose for themselves. Perhaps some people, I wouldn't say everybody, but if some people might want the right to say, well, I really don't want to see another royal family story in my life, and I don't want to pick on the royal family. They've come up twice now, and I've done it. But
you're obviously a fan.
Huge fan, huge fan. My wife's a huge fan, shall I put it that way?
Yeah.
But some people don't want to see them, or they don't want to see politics stories, or they don't want to see X, Y, and Z. And I think the social media apps has allowed people, for better or worse, to filter out things they're not interested in. So that's part of, obviously, the media landscape now.
Is one of the dangers of that, though, that we create an echo chamber so that NZ Herald's only feeding you the views that you want to hear, as opposed to a traditional media role of challenging your thinking?
That's quite well. I'm not sure about views as against potentially subject areas, because there'll be different views within that, and obviously good journalism often presents both perspectives and so on. I think, look, we could talk about that for a lot, but I think, you've still got to bring that forward, but I think you've probably got to curate it in such a way as that people have a look at this, as you're doing actually, as the Herald homepage is doing. But also, I'm fascinated about this whole concept of people seeing journalism through the eyes of individuals rather than what the Herald said. It's what so-and-so at the Herald said. And this is that sort of challenge of opinion versus fact. And speaking as an opinion writer of 5 years now, that's part of it as well. And a lot of people, I don't want to see opinion. But then also I understand opinion pieces are quite well received.
They do get well received. And I think part of the challenge that the Herald has had is differentiating more clearly what is opinion, what is straight news. And, and there's been some little tricks such as italicisation of headlines and things like that that hopefully
makes it clearer.
Makes it clearer and differentiates.
But also the other thing is that you get much more strident feedback now, as we know, in every aspect of life. I got a little award on the weekend and then had my pedigree read to me on social media by people that obviously I live rent-free in their heads. And that's fine. I read some of it out to my daughter actually. She goes, "Oh, Dad, that's terrible."
Never read the comments.
I just laugh because, it's just people sounding off. But, we all get more feedback now than we ever did before, and more immediate feedback. And yes, sometimes it's wise to ignore it.
Yeah, well, that's right. And congratulations on the honour. How did you celebrate?
Oh, it was. I spent most of the day answering messages, but it was. It's a real thrill.
Yeah, and I think that combined with the elevation to the directorship and chair now of NZME, but the honeymoon hasn't lasted too long. Trade Me and stuff kind of came along yesterday morning.
I sort of thought that was going to happen anyway, though.
It had long been speculated.
Yeah, and I think it makes quite a lot of sense. It's putting the band back together from their perspective. Because that's how it all started.
Does it prioritise for you and the board the OneRoof direction?
That will be a
top priority.
That will be a priority. I wouldn't say it's the top priority. There's a lot of stuff that's a priority. And for the new directors, myself and Jim and Bowen, the priority is getting to know the business a heck of a lot better and understanding the drivers. But yes, it's a significant priority. I think it's doing very well, and the question is how do you keep building on that? And also, as has come up in discussions, is how do you surface the value of that? Because, as I think Jim pointed out yesterday, or it might have been Michael or both, that some people value different revenue streams differently, and So on a valuation sense, a multiple of a classified vertical is higher than the multiple of a media vertical, which is intriguing actually, because I can remember clearly when it was the other way around. So I'm sure it'll happen again. But that's just the way it is.
Is your instinct that OneRoof could be spun off into a separate business?
My first instinct is that the relationship between the two should stay. But you could do a range of things from wholly owned to partly owned. But it strikes me there is a real synergy between, it's like the old newspaper days actually. So the front half of the paper used to bring the eyes. Well, that's the news part of the news websites, and then the back half of the paper brought all the income actually through classifieds. And so I think there's a real synergy there. Obviously it's different. You wouldn't just run classified ads these days, passive ones, but what OneRoof is doing is really good.
Totally, and obviously NZME signalled its intention with Gumtree in terms of that motoring space. Is that something?
Yeah, well, that's
you
been.
also
I
want
know.
to see?
I didn't know until Michael said yesterday that Driven had sort of been launched at the same time. But yeah, that's an obvious opportunity. But there might be others as well.
Just switching tack a little bit, government media policy. We
Yep.
had the minister in that chair last week, pretty vague on a timeline for the Fair Digital News bargaining bill and other legislation. Some of it is coming down the pipeline. What are your views on, firstly, Fair Digital News bargaining bill? Do you support it?
I just don't think it's that practical, to be honest.
Right.
And I think that's obviously clearly what's happening, right? Is that countries and jurisdictions are struggling to introduce one, and then with the latest US administration struggling to maintain one. And so I'm not sure. I'm really not sure whether that's the answer. I do think there are some answers. I do think there are responsibilities that the social media organisations should meet to create a level playing field in the media. I mean, the media has obligations. The traditional media has obligations in terms of fairness and balance. It has obligations in terms of libel and defamation, and all these things are sort of cordoned off for the social media companies. I think that'll be an interesting conversation to have, and other things where it's not a level playing field. So I think that's probably a more sort of I was going to say, just a more likely area of success.
I just want to sort of wrap up with talking about the NZME executive team, the management team. Do they have your full confidence?
Yeah,
what they're doing?
I have no reason not to give them my full confidence. I mean, the corollary, always when you're coming into a new organisation, you have to look and listen, and our job as a board is to add value and to challenge the management team in terms of directions and do it positively. And that's really what I'm undertaking to do. But they absolutely don't have any reasons not to have confidence.
Is there, in terms of, obviously Michael gave his outlook, the financial and trading outlook, not as optimistic perhaps as the company would have hoped at the start of the year, and with various commentary even sort of 2 or 3 months ago. What's your own instinct around the next 6 months?
Well, I don't have any instinct yet about the company. I mean, we're doing this conversation, literally a day after I got the role and haven't seen any financials yet, so at all. So I can't offer you any view as to how the company's travelling beyond what Michael said yesterday. But more broadly, I think the economic recovery has been slower than everybody expected, but I think it's reasonably obvious why. In that we have a White House in the US which is reinventing economics, and some would say the laws of economics, and I've said that in my newspaper articles, and that's proving very challenging to world growth. And the OECD came out yesterday, and they're pretty pretty down on the impact of the economic policies of the US in terms of its impact for world growth for the rest of the year. And we're caught up in that. Now, the good news as a country is we've got a bunch of industries which have so far been immune to that downturn, being all our food industries in particular. And so that's been good for us. And I suspect, we've come out of a long period of economic underperformance post-COVID with everything, everything that's happened, and I think there's the animal spirits of capitalism will reassert themselves. It's just the pace at which they do that over the next 6 to 12 months. It's exciting time, I think, to be in the media. I mean, even though it's been challenging, because you get to do all these things that you could never, ever do. Like when I was starting out in radio, well, we didn't even have computers. Well, we did actually. We had a Commodore 64, which we used to program the music. And now you look at it, you know, you're sitting here with video, you've got audio, you've got so many channels of distribution. You could do whatever you want. And sometimes the choice has been a bit overwhelming. And you've got AI now to help, you know, assemble information. Just be careful about its factual basis. And all of that. But and so now it's about, well, what can we do with all of that? And and that's what excites me about coming into NZME, is because there is some of that going on. I think as a board, you've got to encourage that innovation and new ways of doing things, because you can't just sit and we've seen some examples in the media industry, notably the government media side, where they've tended to sit there and hope. And I think. You need to be nimble, you need to be innovative, you need to get on and do some things. And yeah, some things won't work, but that's fine. You can learn from that experience and go on to the next thing.
So we can expect that the new look NZME board will be sitting down in the coming weeks. That will be with Bowen Pan on board, of course. He is the 6th director, and he will be leading much of the charge on the strategic framework of OneRoof and its future direction, especially as it enters that intensified battle with Trade Me. That's it for Media Insider this week. Thanks for joining me. Don't forget to catch the weekly Media Insider column on nzherald.co.nz each Friday, and in print in the Weekend Herald. I'll catch you next week.